Hey there, everybody. Seja here, and welcome back to the Evolutionary Herbalism blog here. And I got a really great email the other day from someone, and she was asking me such a great question that I thought I would shoot a video on it because I realized that this question might apply to a lot of you. And so I just want to, I'm going to read her question here and answer it for you. And before I do so, I just want to say again, if you ever have any questions, anything that you're interested about or musing on, or anything that you're kind of thinking about in regards to plant medicine, feel free to shoot me an email and I can shoot a video and do a blog post on it because I always like having fresh ideas, especially interaction from you, the audience, the people that are listening and watching these videos. So thank you so much for being a part of what we do here. So this question comes from Swethini Hara, and her questions are around connecting with plants. And the first one, she says, can I connect with specific plants by using a bonsai version of them? I am looking to create my altar space and was thinking of having a or some bonsai plants to meditate upon and connect with. Will this work? The answer is yes. You can do this work with any plant. It doesn't matter if it's a mini version, a big version, a small plant, a potted plant, a wild plant, a cultivated plant, any kind of plant you can connect with. You can engage in any type of plant in this direct communication, in this direct perception of the intelligence of the plant. Now, it is, in my opinion, most ideal to work with plants in their wild habitat, in their natural ecosystem. Why? Because that's where you're observing them in their nature, in their natural habitat. You're observing them in the way that kind of nature intended for that plant to be, and there's a lot of information that you can gather about a plant simply by observing the environment within which it is growing. So I always say, if you have the ability to sit with and connect with the plant in its natural habitat, that is always ideal over a garden or in a pot. I also got a great question from someone the other day, living in the middle of Chicago, saying, as a student in the Immersion Program, she's saying all this talk about connecting with plants and communicating with plants and engaging in heart perception with plants is really great, but I live in the middle of a city and I don't have a car. Like, how do I do this? And my advice to her was to see if there's a local arboretum or a park that she could go to, or to just start buying potted plants and to kind of fill your house up, bring the plants to you in that way, and that can be a great way. So in short, yes, any plant will do for this work. Her next question is, how do I know which plant or tree I need to work with now? This is a great question, and it's a question that we get a lot. And so I wanted to answer it to you in this video here, rather than just send her back an email. And so, okay, so to me, the best way to determine what plant is best for you to be working with now, there's a couple approaches to it. There's kind of more of an intuitive approach to it, and there's kind of more of a reductionistic or rational approach to it. Now, the intuitive approach, I would say, is just kind of open yourself up and see what plant is calling to you right now, right? Is there any particular plant that you are just very attracted to? Is there any plant that is kind of synchronistically keep popping up for you? Let me give you an example of that. I'll tell you a story. So one of my favorite plants is wood betony. And when I was studying at Bastyr, I remember one of my teachers who taught herbal first aid said, hey, there's this plant, I think you would really like it. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's called wood betony. I think you should check it out. I think you're going to really like this plant. And I was like, I've never heard of wood betony before, but sure, I'll check it out. So I wrote a little note down. I was like, look up wood betony or whatever. And so a little later on that day, we were in the herb lab, in the medicine making lab, and a good friend of mine had just finished pressing and finished up a bunch of medicine. And she says, hey, I just finished all this medicine. Do you want some? I was like, well, of course, sure. And she was like, well, what do you want? I got all sorts of stuff here. And I was like, I don't know, just pick your hand in the bag and pull something out at random, and whatever you pick out, I'll take, And so she reaches in there and picked out an herb at random and picked wood betony, right? And handed me this bottle of wood betony tincture. And I was like, wow, that's kind of funny. Like, my teacher was just talking about that a few hours ago. And then later on that day, I had this kind of end of day ritual where every night I would sit down and I would read a chapter in one of my favorite herb books, the Book of Herbal Wisdom by Matthew Wood. And I would just kind of open up to a random chapter and just read about that plant. And sure enough, I opened up to wood betony, right? So it was 3 times in one day that this plant randomly communicated to me, right? And we got to think plants aren't like animals. They aren't quite as mobile as animals are, or people are. Kind of the way plants synchronistically weave their ways into our lives is very different and interesting from other forms of life, so to speak. So pay attention, right? This is all about paying attention. What plants are coming up for you? One way I like to suggest to my students too is, go out into nature, go out and do an herb garden and kind of just open your heart out. Just pay attention, observe, be fully immersed in your sensory observations. And make note, is there a flower that looks a little brighter than the rest, or is there a certain herb that really catches your eye, or anything like that? So that's kind of the intuitive way for finding out which remedy might be a good one for you to work with. The other way is kind of more of a reductionistic or rational way. And that would be, kind of taking more of, I would say, more of a clinical approach to this, really sitting down and thinking through what are some of the health issues that you struggle with, what are some constitutional dynamics that you struggle with, and finding an herb that best matches your physiological, psychological state, your constitution, any organ systems that you have any issues with, and kind of finding a remedy that best matches your whole energetic architecture. Now, of course, that can be a very involved process. It does involve the necessity to have some clinical skills, to know your herbs in a good amount of depth. So that's kind of taking it from more of a little bit of a reductionistic approach. But those are the 2 ways I tend to think of how you can kind of figure out what plant would be really good for you to work with at this time. And lastly, any specific guidance on how I can start connecting to nature more and how I can listen to the voice of nature more. This is a great question. And, to me, this is so critical, right? That question is so critical because it's the human species' lack of connection to the natural world that, to me, has created a majority of the issues that we face on the planet at this time, from the ecological crisis to the whole medical side of things, to human health, to politics, to everything, right? It comes down to, in essence, that the human being has separated itself from nature and kind of walled ourselves off. I always say that we built the world to separate ourselves from the earth. And this reconnection with the earth, to me, is imperative at this time. And I believe firmly that the survival of our species is dependent on it, because the human organism is as much a part of nature as everything else. We think we're not. We think we're separate. We think we're bigger and better than the natural world. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably don't, right? But people as a whole tend to, right? The culture at large, let's be honest, does, right? Subconsciously, maybe it's not a conscious thing, but there's this subconscious conditioning that the human being is better than everything else in nature. And that mental orientation is very dangerous. So I believe the greatest ways to reconnect with nature, to learn to listen to the voice of nature, say there's 3 main things that need to happen there. One is to immerse oneself in nature as often as possible, right? It's really hard to be, and I know this might sound like a no duh, Seja kind of statement, right? But it's true, right? I mean, if we live in the city and we're surrounded by square buildings and fluorescent lights and sidewalks and street signs and traffic lights and billboards all the time, it's really hard to be connected to nature, right? And for me, it's like when I'm in the city, I'm always trying to orient myself towards observing the plants and observing whatever nature is around me. I was just in Phoenix last weekend, and that was a serious exercise in that for me, to be able to like try to find the little bits of nature in the cracks of the sidewalk and things like that. So the more you can immerse yourself in the natural world, to go camping, to go hiking, to go visit your local park, to just lay on the grass and listen to the birds and to feel the earth underneath your feet, to pay attention to the seasons and the cycles and when everything kind of starts to come back to life here in the springtime and the flowers and everything's growing, and when everything's kind of dying back down in the fall, and just tuning into that natural rhythm and that natural cycle, and to see how what's going on externally in nature is what's going on internally within us. You know, I can remember in my early 20s, I had this kind of really profound epiphany that is probably not going to sound very profound to you, because this is kind of like common knowledge in, you know, most kind of more new age spirituality, or not even new age spirituality, but just spirituality in general, right? But it's that, yeah, the outside and the inside are reflective of one another, right? That I realized, like, oh, like, duh, like in the winter, I kind of like to sleep a little more, and I like to be a little more mellow, and I like to read books and curl up by the fire and not be so active and dynamic. But in the summer, I get to like travel more, you know? And so having that realization of the relationship between our internal state and the external reality of nature is critical. So that's the first thing, to immerse yourself in nature. 2 is to engage in sensory observation, right? That to realize that everything in nature is a language, everything is communicating. And so everything from the shape of the plant to the color of the flower to the ecosystem where it grows, everything about it is a communication. And so it's really important to engage in our sensory observation, to and I always say to transmute our senses. So you're not just looking, but you're seeing. You're not just hearing, but you're listening, right? You're not touching, but you're feeling, right? So to engage, to really like put your consciousness behind your sensory faculty, and to really pay attention to what's going on, and to see what that language is. And just going into the natural world with that understanding that everything is a language, everything is communicating, it just doesn't always use words. So that's the second thing, is to engage in sensory observation. 3 is to locate your consciousness from your mind into your heart. You know, there's a lot I could say about this, but I'll be brief about it. But, you know, what this modern science is showing is that the heart is the primary organ of perception, not the brain. And let's face it, most human beings are up in their head all the time, right? That we don't really locate our consciousness in our heart. And so the whole thing with the heart is that it perceives the electromagnetic spectrum. It perceives electromagnetic information, and plants are constantly emitting electromagnetic information. And so the more you're able to locate your consciousness away from your mind and from thinking and into your heart and feeling, the more you'll be able to connect to the language and the intelligence of nature and plants. So thank you so much, Svathini. I hope I'm saying your name right. Probably not. Pardon me for that. But thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much, everybody, for checking out this video. I know it's been a while since I've shot a video for you here. So please, I would love to hear about your experiences in connecting with plants. How would you have answered those questions from Swathini there? How do you best connect with plants and nature? What are some stories that maybe you have around it? I would love to hear about it. Please post that in the comments box below. And if you're watching this anywhere else but our blog, please head over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, where we've got tons more videos for you and lots of free training and goodies there. And thanks so much, everyone, for checking out this video. Until next time, take care and be well.